The corridor is dark. My hands are steady. That surprises me. I expected fear. I expected the kind of trembling that betrays a woman the moment she needs her body to be silent. But there is nothing, only the cold weight of the parchment folded against my ribs, and the sound of my own breathing, and the distant stamp of horses in the courtyard below who are waiting to carry me to a wedding that will never happen. My name is Lady Matilda Rosebury. Tomorrow, the court of the Loire Valley will wake to find me gone. They will search the bedchamber. They will find one silk glove on the marble floor and a candle burned to nothing. They will conclude, depending on their loyalties, that I fled out of cowardice or madness or love. None of them will be correct. I am not running from a man. I am not running toward freedom. I am walking, deliberately, quietly, one foot in front of the other through the dark, because I am the only person alive who knows what the Treaty of Vauclaire actually says. And if I stay, that knowledge destroys everything. This story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons or places is purely coincidental. Now, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. This channel reaches every corner of the world, and we love knowing where our community is. If stories like this move you, subscribe. This channel is built on persistence, and every subscriber is proof that persistence has an audience. Before we go further, here is the question this story will ask you by the end. How much would you be willing to sacrifice in silence for people who will never know what you gave up? To understand the woman in that corridor, you must first understand the world that built her. The year was 1743, and France was not merely a kingdom. It was a machine. A vast, intricate, merciless machine held together not by the love of its people, but by the careful engineering of noble alliance. Every title had a price. Every bloodline had an obligation. And every daughter born into a house of standing was, from the moment she could walk gracefully across a marble floor, a piece waiting to be placed on a board she had no hand in designing. The House of Rosebury was Anglo-French, distinguished enough to hold a position at court, but not powerful enough to hold it independently. Their standing rested on something no army could protect and no treasury could ensure. They were the custodians of a document, a single folded sheet of parchment that had sat for 34 years behind a false panel in Lord Aldrich Rosebery's private library, gathering the particular silence of dangerous things. It was called the Treaty of Vauclaire. In the winter of 1709, a junior branch of the French royal bloodline had found itself in a desperate negotiation. Facing the forced surrender of a subsidiary duchy, this branch had struck a private compact, not a public treaty ratified at Versailles with seals and ceremony, but the kind arranged between two men in a candlelit room with no witnesses beyond their own ambition. The terms were straightforward. The junior branch would relinquish its claim to the duchy. In return, the house that absorbed that duchy was bound, within 2 generations, to cement the arrangement through marriage. Specifically, a marriage to a daughter of the House of Rosebury, the family appointed as the neutral witness and custodian of the agreement. That house was the Valcroix. That marriage had never been honored. The Duc de Valcroix, Etienne Gaston Moreau, peer of France, confidant to the royal household, and a man whose political instincts were as sharp as they were cold, had absorbed the duchy without fulfilling a single term of the compact that made it his. For 34 years, he had relied on the Rosebury family's discretion and their precarious position at court to ensure the treaty never surfaced. And for 34 years, that calculation had held. Then Matilda came of age, and the Duc devised a solution so elegant it deserves to be recognized for exactly what it was. He did not approach Lord Aldrich with threats. He did not arrive with lawyers or ultimatums or the kind of pressure that leaves visible marks. He arrived with generosity. A grander title for the Rosebury estate, a restoration of certain properties that had quietly diminished over the years, and most compellingly, the offer of a magnificent marriage for his daughter into one of the most powerful houses in France. In the courts of 18th century France, This kind of offer carried a particular name: noblesse oblige, the obligation of the noble class to extend their protection downward, to elevate those within their sphere, to act as patrons and benefactors to families of lesser standing. It was the language of generosity, of honor, of social duty. Wielded as a weapon, it became something else entirely. Lord Aldrich Rosebery accepted. He had little real choice. To refuse was to signal that the Rosebery family valued the treaty above their own survival. And in the courts of Bourbon France, a family that made that calculation did not remain at court for long. The acceptance was dressed as gratitude. It felt, to everyone who witnessed it, like good fortune. Only Matilda understood what had actually been exchanged. She was to be the seal on an arrangement her family had never been party to making. Not a bride, a closing signature on a document 34 years overdue. What she did not know yet, not fully, not with the precise and actionable clarity she would need, was that the man she was being given to already knew it too. Gaspard Moreau, the Duke's eldest son and her intended husband, was not the passive instrument of his father's ambitions. He was, in his own quieter way, an extension of them. In the 3 weeks between the formal announcement of the betrothal and the eve of the wedding, he had conducted himself with the careful attentiveness of a man who understands that the most important transactions require monitoring until they are complete. He sent his personal valet to inquire of Cornélie Vos, Matilda's lady's maid, about her daily movements. Not once, every day. The inquiries were framed as concern, as the natural attentiveness of a devoted suitor wishing to ensure his future wife was comfortable and well attended. Cornélie, who had sharp eyes and a long memory, noted that the questions were never about Matilda's comfort. They were about her location, her schedule, the names of anyone she had spoken to privately. Her outgoing correspondence passed through Gaspard's father's secretary before it was dispatched. This was presented, when Matilda remarked upon the delay of a letter, as a standard household courtesy, a matter of ensuring that the future Duchess's communications were handled with the dignity appropriate to her new station. At supper, before 30 witnesses, Gaspard remarked upon her admirable serenity, her docility of temperament, her remarkable composure for a young woman on the eve of such a significant change in her circumstances. The table received these observations as compliments. Matilda received them as an inventory. What Gaspard and his father had not accounted for was this. In 1743, a noblewoman who married surrendered not merely her freedom of movement, but her legal existence, under the customary law that governed French noble households, law that would later be codified and made explicit in the Code Napoleon of 1804. But was already the operating reality of every aristocratic marriage in the kingdom. A wife could not enter a contract, manage inherited property, or act as a legal witness independently of her husband. The moment Matilda spoke her vows, the Treaty of Vauclaire would pass from the Rosebery custodianship into a household where her husband's father had already demonstrated, across 34 years, precisely what he did with inconvenient documents. It would vanish, and so would she, not from the chateau, but from any form of agency over the thing her family had been trusted to protect. It was Cornélie who made sure Matilda understood the full shape of it. 3 nights before the wedding, during the final fitting of the ivory bridal gown, while 3 seamstresses moved around Matilda with their pins and their murmured measurements, Cornélie pressed a folded note into her palm beneath a spool of Bruges lace. It contained 11 words that rearranged everything. The treaty is not destroyed. Gaspard has read it. He knows. Matilda stood very still while the seamstresses continued their work. She did not speak. She did not move. She smiled. The particular smile of a woman who has just understood the exact dimensions of the trap around her, and has simultaneously begun to calculate the distance to the door. She had 3 days. And she had already decided. The plan was not elegant. Matilda would be the first to acknowledge, in the private journal she kept for the remainder of her life, that it relied more upon nerve than ingenuity. But nerve, in the courts of Bourbon France, was the one currency a woman of rank could carry without requiring a man's endorsement. And Matilda had discovered, in the 3 days between Cornélie's note and the night of the wedding, that she possessed it in quantities she had never previously been required to measure. She had 4 allies. Cornélie Vos, who had served her since childhood, and whose loyalty was the one fixed and unquestioned point in a world that turned entirely on convenience. Cornélie, who had located the treaty not in the East Wing as the note had suggested, but behind a devotional painting of St. Catherine in the Duke's private oratory, a room no woman in the household was permitted to enter by custom and by the Duke's explicit standing instruction. Cornélie had entered it regardless, in the gray quarter hour between matins bells and the breakfast hour, while the household breathed in sleep, and had returned with the parchment folded inside her apron as calmly as though she had retrieved a misplaced handkerchief. A young underfootman named Theodore Lacroix, who owed Cornélie a favor of sufficient gravity that he asked no questions, sought no explanations, and understood that some instructions are best carried out without the burden of full comprehension. The convent of the Sisters of St. Clair, 40 leagues east of the chateau, situated in the quiet borderlands where the Loire Valley gives way to the rolling country of Burgundy. Its abbess, Mère Séraphine, had once moved in court circles herself, a fact she neither confirmed nor denied, but that expressed itself in the particular understanding with which she received women who arrived without warning, without luggage, and without a story they were prepared to tell in full. She understood, without being told, that women sometimes come in the night carrying nothing but their conscience. And the 4th ally was the treaty itself. The document the Duc had spent 11 years trying to neutralize was now folded inside the lining of Matilda's traveling cloak, cold against her ribs, as she moved toward the servants' stairwell at 11:30 on the night before her wedding. Cornélie had extinguished the bedchamber candles one by one, leaving only the single tallow stub that would become the symbol of this night to those who searched the room at dawn. Matilda had exchanged her ivory dressing robe for a plain wool traveling dress. No crest, no embellishment, nothing that named her. A dark cloak over it. No jewels. No letters of introduction. No prayer book. She took the treaty, and she took Cornélie, and she did not look back at the room. Theodore had been stationed at the East Passage to draw the night guard away. He had done so, but not completely. One guard remained at his post, half drowsing, his halberd catching the torchlight from the courtyard below. Another woman might have retreated, might have pressed back into the shadow and waited for a safer moment. Matilda walked directly toward him. She told him, in a voice that carried not a tremor of uncertainty, that she had been sent by the Duchesse to retrieve a devotional text from the lower library for the morning prayers, and that she would be sure to mention his diligence at his post when she returned. A guard does not contradict a princess. He stepped aside. She walked through. The postern gate, the narrow servants' exit cut into the northernmost face of the chateau wall, was bolted from within. What Theodore had not foreseen was that the chateau's head steward, a meticulous Burgundian named Monsieur Harsel, had chosen that same night to conduct a late inventory of the wine cellars, whose entrance sat directly adjacent to the postern passage. Monsieur Harsel was a man of precise habit and deep loyalty to the Valcroix household. He looked up from his ledger as Matilda and Cornélie came around the corner. His face moved through surprise, then recognition, and then settled into something that was neither, a long, careful stillness, the expression of a man performing a private calculation whose terms no one else in the room could see. He looked at the cloak. He looked at the plain dress beneath it. He looked at the hour and the direction and the leather satchel at Cornélie's side. And then he looked down at his ledger. He did not speak. He did not move toward the bell pull. He simply continued counting bottles, in the methodical way of a man for whom the inventory is, at this particular moment, the only thing in the world that requires his attention. History does not record why. Perhaps he had daughters of his own. Perhaps he had watched, across long years of service in that household, what became of women who were absorbed into it. perhaps in his Burgundian bones, he recognized that the direction she was walking was toward his own country, and felt, in some wordless way, that this gave him a quiet permission to be blind. Whatever the reason, Matilda walked past him, through the postern gate, and out into the cold Loire Valley night. The market cart Theodore had arranged, his cousins stripped of any identifying mark, was waiting beyond the outer wall. She did not look back at the towers of the Château de Valcroix. She fixed her eyes on the dark road ahead, and she kept them there, her face turned east toward Burgundy, toward 40 leagues of cold and silence, toward the only sovereign territory left available to her. She did not weep until the chateau's torchlight had entirely disappeared behind her. And then she wept without sound, her face still forward, because the grief was real and the direction was fixed, and there was no contradiction between the two. At the convent of the Sisters of St. Clair, in the gray light before lauds on the second morning after her arrival, Lady Matilda Rosebury sat at a plain writing desk and composed 3 letters. The first was to her father. It contained no accusation and no elaboration. Lord Aldrich was to accept the dissolution of the betrothal with dignity, to attribute it to her ill health and the intervention of Providence, and to make no further approach to the Valcroix household. He was not to seek her. He was to trust that what she had done with full knowledge of its cost. The second was to Mère Séraphine, a formal request, framed in the correct canonical language, for a period of retreat of indeterminate duration under the convent's protection. It was signed with her full name and complete title, in large and deliberate letters, so that no one who received a copy could later argue that she had arrived in confusion or under any form of duress. In the legal architecture of pre-revolutionary France, a noblewoman who entered a convent under formal cloture, placed herself within a sanctuary that even royal officials were, in principle, bound to respect. It was not freedom in any sense the word would later come to carry, but it was the one form of sovereignty the 18th century made available to a woman of rank who had exhausted every other option. Matilda had not exhausted her options. She had surveyed them with precision and chosen this one deliberately, with both eyes open. The third letter was to the Duc de Valcroix. It contained no evidence of the treaty, no threats, no demands, no catalogue of his violations across 34 years of calculated silence. It contained a single sentence, written in the neat and unhurried hand of a woman who had already decided that composure was the most devastating thing she could display. The matter you sought to manage through my person is now managed. The document will cause no one harm. You have my silence, and in exchange, you will leave my family's name intact and my father's position undisturbed. Plain red wax. No crest. No monogram. Theodore carried it east and returned 4 days later with nothing. No reply. No messenger. No soldiers at the convent gate. The Duc had understood. On a gray November morning in 1744, 11 months after the night she walked through the postern gate, Lady Matilda Rosebury carried the Treaty of Vauclaire to the convent's bread oven. She did not read it one final time. She placed it in the fire and stood until there was nothing left but ash and the faint, dry smell of old wax dissolving into heat. The parchment that had shaped the last decade of her life, that had determined who she was permitted to become, who she was required to marry, what she was expected to silently absorb, was gone in the time it took the morning's bread to finish rising. No witness, no ceremony, no record. She spent the next 11 years at the convent of the Sisters of St. Clair. She taught letters to the daughters of local tradespeople. She corresponded with Cornélie, who had married Theodore Lacroix and kept a modest household in Lyon. She grew medicinal herbs along the south-facing cloister wall and became known in the surrounding parishes as a woman of unusual and reliable good sense. She never married. She never petitioned for the restoration of anything she had left behind. The Duc de Valcroix died in 1751, his duchy intact, his reputation unblemished, his private arrangement with the House of Rosebury honored, in silence, until the last breath left his body. The monarchy Matilda had quietly protected never learned her name. The succession she had preserved through her own disappearance never acknowledged the cost of its preservation. The throne she had shielded did not know it had been shielded, and still she did not speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had understood, with a clarity that the gilded salons of the Duc de Valcroix had somehow failed to extinguish, that there are moments in which the most powerful thing a person can do is choose the weight they are willing to carry, and carry it without asking to be seen. Sacrifice does not require an audience. It requires only that the one who makes it understands, fully and without consolation, exactly what they are surrendering, and surrenders it anyway. Lady Matilda Rosebury was never found, because she was never truly lost. She simply chose a different kind of throne, one built not from the approval of a court, or the security of a title, or the protection of a man's name, but from the quiet and unassailable knowledge that when the moment came, she had known exactly what honor required, and she had not flinched. This story is fiction, but its bones are built from history. In 1714, the Treaty of Utrecht reshaped European borders and forced noble families across France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic into political marriages they had no power to refuse. Women were legally erased by marriage under French customary law long before Napoleon codified it in 1804, and convents genuinely functioned as sanctuaries. In 1689, French noblewoman Charlotte de Caumont entered the convent of the Visitation in Paris not from faith, but to escape a forced remarriage arranged by her family's creditors.